border security, something that we're desperately needing today. The comment during the film was great. We're not a democracy. We're a republic. We're a representative republic. There's aspects of our nation that have a bit of democracy, but the problem with democracy is it's kind of mob rule. And what our founders, especially people like John Adams, they were very fearful of democracy. As a matter of fact, John Adams said that no democracies ever lasted long, that they self-destructed, that they committed suicide. And most of our founders really had that same fear of democracy. So our system of government is a republic. We have representatives. We send our representatives to Washington to represent our interests. In sending them to Washington, our original design, when you read the Constitution, was that senators would be selected by the states. And the House of Representatives would be selected by popular vote. The notion behind that, and it was a compromise at the time, but the notion behind that was that the senators would represent the interests of the states. So for example, if we still had that system in place today, Obamacare probably would not have passed, because Obamacare, one of the defects of Obamacare, one of many, is that it causes a huge financial burden on the states. Senators, if they were absolutely obliged to looking after the needs of the states and representing the needs of the states, probably would not have voted for it. Approximately in the 1895, right around that time frame, up through the early 1900s, the states actually wanted to pass their own amendment, to have the popular election of senators. As they were getting close to the threshold, they needed, at that time, goodness, we didn't have 50 states at that time. Basically, you need 2/3 of the states to be able to go into a convention and propose amendments. At that time, the Congress went ahead and stepped in. I think the Congress, by and large, is very leery of allowing the states to propose amendments. And every time the states have come close to proposing an amendment, they typically step in. So in 1913, they went ahead and passed an amendment that allowed for the popular election of senators. That happened again in 1985, when the states were very, very close. As I mentioned earlier, there were 32 of the 34 required states to pass a balanced budget amendment. As they were getting close, I think once again, the Congress became very concerned. I think they really wanted a monopoly over the amendment process. And so after the the Republican Revolution in 1994, the House of Representatives went ahead and passed a balanced budget amendment, but then it fell one senator short in the Senate. So we didn't get our balanced budget amendment. Okay, to continue, decentralized government or federalism. Founders wanted a limited government. They wanted a central government that had enough teeth, enough strength to look after the liberties of people, but not a strong enough government that would usurp the will of the people as well as the will of the states. So they wanted a centralized government, and federalism is that relationship between the states and the federal government. And right now, over the years, the federal government has gotten larger and larger and larger. The states have diminished considerably in their role within our government system. So one of the things that is my desire, my hope, and hopefully yours as well, with the Tea Party movement, is we can get that balance back that the founders wanted as far as the relationship between the people, the states, and the federal government. Finally, fiduciary law. Fiduciary law is kind of interesting. People back in the 18th century understood fiduciary law. If you were, for example, a farmer, you owned hundreds of acres of land, you start getting sick, you thought you were going to die. One way of protecting your family, protecting everything you own, would be to have a relationship, a fiduciary relationship with a banker, a businessman, somebody that would look after your interests. So when you read in any of our founding documents, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, when you read terms like agents, trustees, servants, guardians, these are pretty common terms when you're talking about our founding documents. They're referring to this fiduciary responsibility that was inherent in the design of the Constitution. The notion of the Constitution is it's a government that's looking after the best interest of the people. So for example, if that farmer goes ahead and dies, whoever he's appointed with fiduciary responsibilities is going to look after the best interest of the farmer's family. He's going to make sure that there's some food on the table, that there's some money available. If taxes are due in the land, he's going to make sure those taxes are paid. If any other legal problems come up associated with the land, he's going to make sure that he's protecting that family. That's his fiduciary duty. It's the same with the federal government. They have a fiduciary responsibility towards the people. That's the relationship that we have from our Constitution, from our system of government. I think that might be our last slide. That's our last slide.
Last slide.
So, please, we're going to do some questions in just a moment, but please contact me. You can email me. You probably contact Roger as well, email Roger. One way or another, if you need a copy, electronic copy of the syllabus with some of these websites, we can do that. You can download those files like Samuel Johnson's dictionary, but they're really large. I think altogether it's about 150, 180 megabytes to get the actual page-by-page scans. It's fascinating to read if you're a history buff, to see what words meant back then. Other resources that were used, for example, in the writing of this book, of course, I've already mentioned the Federalist Papers, the Constitution itself, reading the Constitution, but you can't really rely completely upon that because you need kind of a grounding, if you will, and this gentleman does it as far as from a legal basis, what the Constitution or what legal terms were, what the design of a legal document was like in the 18th century. Also, words. Words are really important. In this document, or as you read this book, there's a section, for example, that talks about a clause in the Constitution that talks about property. And in the 18th century, property could have meant money, could have meant possessions, it could have meant real estate, the actual land. And so he then has to look at the definitions of property as they stood at that time, the legal reasons for even including that particular section within the Constitution, and then also putting everything in context. Context is really important when you're reading a legal document for determining whether they're talking about real estate or they're talking about money. I mentioned last week something kind of interesting that you'll learn in this book. There's great information in this book, but for example, prior to the ratification of the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton, to my surprise, was kind of an interesting character. Some of the things he wanted would probably work perfect today. He wanted presidents and congresspeople to be lifelong appointments. So when you think of Senator Byrd being in Congress for 53 years, I would say that's about as close as you're going to get. But another thing that, when you're talking about the attack, if you will, on the Constitution, Alexander Hamilton, prior to the ratification, he suggested, he was a proponent of Congress having free will to spend money any way they wanted. During the ratification and in the Federalist Papers, he contradicted himself. He then made the statement that no, Congress would not have free rein to spend money any way they want. After the ratification of the Constitution, he then jumped back to his original thoughts that Congress could spend money any way they want. So now you fast forward, that would have been in the late 1700s, now you fast forward in the 1930s, where a Federalist judge only cites Alexander Hamilton's view on spending money. None of the other founders or framers shared the same view as Alexander Hamilton. But this federal judge decided that because Hamilton thought that Congress could spend money any way they want, that that should be the new norm. From that, there was an actual judgment made that then opened up the floodgates. And as you can see today, Congress spends money any way they want. So for roughly the first, was about 150 years of our nation, Congress was restrained. They were limited in what they could spend money on. And then in the 1930s, probably because of the Great Depression and the need for doing unusual things to try to jumpstart our economy, Congress was unleashed. And now, if you're not aware, our national debt is increasing by $4 billion a day. The interest on the debt is approximately $1 billion a day, so roughly $5 billion a day. So we're in a world of hurt, and hopefully, by really understanding the Constitution, that will arm you, give you that quiver or that arrow in your quiver to be able to contradict and challenge people when they make a statement that just isn't constitutionally correct. We need this kind of knowledge so that we can keep our representatives in their rightful constitutional place. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and take some questions if you have questions. And then next session when we get together, we're going to delve right into the reading assignment, and we're going to talk about some of the more important aspects of each of the sections within the book as we go forward. Joy?
Bob, you mentioned that the Bill of Rights initially had 12 amendments. What was 11 and 12?
The number 1 amendment was the latest one ratified, which was, I believe, 1995, which would